So I am Professor of Computing Education here, which means I look after our secondary PGCE program, training folks to go and teach computing in loads of our partner schools, which is tremendously good fun. Roehampton are generous with my time and let me out to do other interesting things, one of which was this weird invite from the, Higher Education Policy Institute you heard about which yesterday, to say, could you come and speak at this roundtable dinner about AI in higher education? And you say, generally I say yes to these things. You know, there's a free meal involved, no such thing as a free supper. And then they send me the guest list. And it looks as pretty much everybody on the list has Vice-Chancellor somewhere in the title. Sometimes that was the only thing in their job title. So I felt very much out of place. But talking a little about what these generative AI tools particularly, but other machine learning tools, mean for higher education seemed to be something which I could do for 10 minutes. There are convincing arguments for doing this sort of thing, one of which is around workload. So the whole thing about there is stuff that I have to spend loads of time writing, which actually this machine could at least do a draft for me, or I could do the start and then it could improve that. And interestingly, at that dinner, there was a real difference between my approach, and I suspect our approach, of we start, and then the machine goes and does the improvement to it. That's generally how I'm using it. Anybody else in the room doing it that way? Okay, right. And the people with posh job titles around the supper table who say, no. We get it to do the first 70% of the work, and then we come in and just put our personal voice on it. I don't know whether that's a significant predictor or not. So workload is one convincing argument. And for me, the other really persuasive case is taking away some of the barriers to learning. I know it is incredibly bad practice to just read text aloud from a slide, but I'm going to read the text aloud from the slide here. This is part of the talk I gave at that supper. How does university education work today? Largely through lectures presenting content, seminars encouraging discussions between academics and students, access to libraries or resources, assignments and feedback. Practicals and placements are also central for many disciplines, but I suspect your experience isn't radically different from mine. There are apparently a couple of universities, also collegiate institutions, interestingly, that employ another teaching approach, centered around weekly tutorials or supervisions. In these sessions, one or two students meet with an academic tutor to discuss work prepared in advance. The tutor then provides detailed feedback and critique of the student's work. These universities typically enroll highly confident, knowledgeable, and independent students who probably need this level of support and engagement far less than students elsewhere. The large language models are much like the best tutors, well-read, articulate, patient, adaptable, and generally helpful, even if the AIs are perhaps more willing than most academics to make things up when they're not sure. With ChatGPT and other large language models, we now have the opportunity to bring this tutorial-based approach to education for all students. I think that's phenomenal, yeah? Send me an essay, ask me some questions about this reading or the content of this lecture, and critique my response to that. Tell me what I had missed out from all of that. I work in teacher education. I know the current framework doesn't allow me to mention Lev Vygotsky, but we still occasionally, if Ofsted aren't visiting, mention Vygotsky. And Vygotsky's great insight is this thing about the zone of proximal development. What the learner is able to do in collaboration today, they will be able to do independently tomorrow. Vygotsky was clearly talking about teachers as the more knowledgeable other there, as the person with whom the learner was collaborating. We came along and then realized that we could talk about their peers as something who can do that sort of support as well. I suspect if he were writing today, he would recognize that the generative AIs, the large language models, ChatGPT, Copilot, the rest, can take the role of that more knowledgeable, ludicrously well-read, other. But the point here is, yes, you're using the machine to help now, tomorrow, or in a year's time, or when it comes to sitting a final exam, you'll need to be able to do that independently. We take that responsibility for our learners. We don't do the work for them. The machines don't yet seem to see that they should be helping people to do that independently. Anyhow, there's loads of tools out there. I have been briefed to use Copilot as much as I can here, so there are examples in Copilot, which is provided to you all for free. You've got like 30 goes within an individual chat, which generally I don't think you're likely to use up, and then just start a new chat and it will give you another 30 goes. There are other things. ChatGPT is probably the first to market. Google's Gemini is really, really nice if you tend to be using Google a lot for this sort of thing. And Claude from Anthropic is very, very cool if you're wanting to try and get interactive activities out of it. Most of my examples will be with Copilot. How can it help? As I say, it is ludicrously well read. It has read most of the internet. It has read most of the books. It knows stuff. Think about your colleagues as you look around the room here. Who do you know in the room who has read so much about this domain? That's nothing compared to what the large language models have read in that particular domain. It writes very well. I am making a tape of this, and so I don't really want to say this, but I'm going to say it anyhow. Generally, with my postgraduate students, students who already have a degree, if I am presented with 2 essays, the better written one is more likely to come from the machine rather than from my student. And that we've got to that point already is so sad, isn't it? It doesn't necessarily mean it's more insightful. It doesn't necessarily tell me anything about how to teach kids or whatever. But usually it has a better command of language than postgraduate students. Admittedly, in computing education, it's probably different over in English and history and other lovely subjects. It can take on roles. It can play a persona very well. It can write code, although Kevin may wish to argue with me. And I don't know what we mean by creative here, but it thinks of things that I haven't. Partly because it's read more than I have, yeah? And so if you get it to brainstorm ideas, it will come up with stuff that you've not necessarily thought of. And its default persona in there, in the system prompt, is be a helpful assistant. Given the choice between being helpful and being truthful, it is programmed to be helpful. That isn't always helpful, to be fair. Okay, so I want to start with reading. I want to start with reading. Okay, so there's a thing going on here about barriers to learning. What are the things which make engagement in our courses, engagement in our programs, with our modules, with our assignments, difficult for all of our students, or particularly for some of our students? We have loads of students with us who are dyslexic. You give them a 3,000-word long journal article, which is the best and most authoritative thing in that particular domain, and say, read this, and we're going to talk about this in the seminar. Just pause for a moment and think how hard that is for a dyslexic student, for a student for whom English is not their first language, for a student who has ADHD and will really struggle to make it past the end of the abstract and the introduction. It's not to say that these aren't skills which they can acquire. Of course they can. But we've immediately put a real big stumbling block in the way of them being able to actually make sense of the thing that we think they should read. So Scarborough and the reading, I'm conscious that there are English education experts in the room. Okay, don't do this with them. Has this lovely model of to read, you need essentially 2 things. Firstly, you have to be able to figure out what the little squiggles all say. There is this, what is it? It's grapheme, phoneme, decode, correspondence. Okay, so the squiggles on the page apparently have particular sounds to them, and we have to teach young children how to be able to do that. And the current approach to primary school reading teaching is to say, you must do that first. That's the most important thing, and there will be a test at the age of 6 to see whether you can read out nonsense words, to check whether you have been trained. Is trained the right word? To bark at the print, to decode what the squiggles mean. Scarborough says there is a whole other bit to it as well, which is actually understanding what the text says. Yeah? If you're dyslexic, if you're visually impaired, this bit is really, really hard. But the top bit isn't necessarily. So our dyslexic students may struggle with the grapheme-phoneme correspondence, but might still be able to understand the ideas and the argument. So why put that stumbling block of decoding the print in the way? A couple of apps on your phone there. So the Kindle thing on a phone is just amazing. It really is. So let's just try and power this up on this one. Let's go find something which isn't ludicrously embarrassing to put up on my screen here. Okay, and with a bit of luck, I can screen share to you. Maybe. I'm asking a lot of my computers now. Okay, here we go. Stop mirroring. Come out of here. And then 2 fingers down from the top of the screen. On a good day, that's why I say never do live demos.
Preferences of the children. What does it mean to say that Carolyn should try to figure out what the students would choose on their own? In a cafeteria, it is impossible to avoid some way of organizing food.
You've got the idea, okay, so I don't need to labour the point. Please bring my screen back, otherwise it's going to be very dull. Okay, let's try stopping the screen sharing. Stop mirroring. That's better. So look, apparently I'm not supposed to read whilst I'm driving into Roehampton. Did anybody else know this rule? But there's nothing to stop me having my Kindle app reading the book aloud to me. There's nothing to stop your trainees, your students, having Kindle or whatever. And Audible is just fabulous for this sort of thing. Other tools are available. So then you have the screen reader. He brought in a book especially so as to be able to demo some of this. Bear with me a moment whilst we sort out and find a piece of paper here. And again, I'm going to attempt to do the screen mirroring thing, which worked so well last time. Screen mirroring. Oh, come on. You see the MacBook? It's there. Look. Mars's Mac. Better. Good. Okay, stop all of that. And we go over to Microsoft Seeing AI.
Short text. A thought experiment. 39 students post-FL. The modular degree offers the students some choices in ad semester so that they can, to some extent, design their own program. University-wide
legacy materials and stuff which is printed out on dead trees. Your students can have that read aloud to them. It's originally intended for blind users, visually impaired users, but there is no restriction on its use. You do not have to prove your visual impairment before you're allowed to install that on your phone for free from our friends at Microsoft for the iPhone. We have built in to our Office 365 offer Immersive Reader. Here is the first version of our AI policy, and I would like that read aloud to me, please.
Submissions. The use of generative AI may be completely permissible, and you may have agreed this with your students in advance.
If I want to, I can make that go black text on a yellow background and change the font to Comic Sans. Isn't that suddenly much more accessible? No? I don't know. I do not trust Comic Sans. So we've got that for free built into Office 365. Do your students know that that's there? Do they know that they could have their essay read back to them, which might help them understand where the issues are with the spelling, punctuation, grammar, whatever. And then, of course, there are the papers we give them to read. So here we have Sweller's cognitive load paper, which we were practicing with at the start there. And on a good day, I can just inside the Acrobat or the PDF reader built into my browser here, have that read aloud to me.
Problem-solving skill is highly valued. For most of this century, many theorists and educational institutions have placed a heavy emphasis on this ability, especially in mathematics and science. See Dewey, 1910, 1916.
Thank goodness she stops at this point. That's helpful, isn't it? But again, I mean, for many of us, just having it read aloud seems easier. There is a danger that we multitask and don't actually concentrate on what's being read. If you're getting on with the cooking or doing the washing up while somebody is reading an academic paper to you, I don't know if you're really concentrating very much, and concentration probably matters as a graduate outcome. So then I can take that text, which is freely available online, I'm delighted to say, and ping that to Copilot. And I think this is the one, and say something to it such as, I'll try and make this a bit bigger for you. Is that showing up any better? Okay, all right. Give me a, 6-bullet point summary of Sweller's argument here. High cognitive load during problem solving can hinder, during problem solving can hinder learning because it consumes mental resources needed for understanding and remembering information. Some of you will have read the paper, some of you will know this well. For your students, being able to get that, just give me the key information. It's not as good as reading the paper. Of course it isn't. But it takes away the barrier of I cannot concentrate long enough. I cannot focus on what the words on the page or on the screen say to be able to understand the big ideas here. Let's try this. Tell me 5 unexpected things about this paper. Oh, it now has to read them. Okay. Right. I don't know. So Sweller uses a computational model to measure cognitive load, which was an innovative approach at the time. The model showed that means-end analysis imposes a high cognitive load compared to non-specific goal strategies, providing strong evidence for this. His argument. Now, you know, the student who has cheated, who has used that to make this more accessible, comes into your seminar and says, I thought it was really interesting that Sweller had adopted this computational model. Had anybody done that before Sweller? You are forming the impression they know much here. They're very insightful. Are they, or is it just the appearance of that? I don't know. This is tricky. All right, so we have other examples, 10 simplified key points with the language. Okay, here we do the straw poll. Who has tried Notebook LM? Thank you, Kevin. Okay, this is your one key takeaway. Pauses for effect. From today, okay, go home and try Notebook LM. The next time you send a paper to your students and say, read this before the thing, Notebook LM is your friend. It's from Google. It is for free as things stand at the moment. So I gave it the same paper, the Sweller cognitive load thing. It gives me a very nice summary here. This 1988 cognitive science paper argues that conventional problem solving, blah, 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 blah. I can get the usual thing out of this. So what does Sweller mean by, what was it, non-specific goals? Relate this to the teaching of programming, which is only Kevin and me who are interested in that, but there you go. Right. And it's thinking about that. Okay, so what are you getting in here? You are getting lots in the context of problem solving. According to the sources, non-specific goal problems calculate the value of as many variables, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then I get, often involves specific goals as such as write a program to sort this list or write a function to compare this. Non-specific might instead ask students to explore a particular library or programming concept. And you notice the little footnotes it's putting in here, which is where it's found that in the text. If you want to sound very knowledgeable, you talk about resource-augmented generation, and people think you know a lot about AI. So we know that it just makes stuff up. It's not making this up. I gave it the paper and said, read this paper, then tell me about this, which is different from just tell me what you think Sweller means by this. Much less likely to make stuff up if given source material from which to work. Okay, it will do, gladly, a study guide for the paper. So we have here 10 quick questions about have you actually read the paper? And of course we have the answers if you want to check self-quizzing and all of that. That's pretty cool. And then the thing which everybody got excited about with Notebook LM. Here you go, folks.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're looking into something pretty fundamental to, well, pretty much everything we do. Learning. Mm-hmm. We're going to be diving into some research about learning and especially how it works in fields like math and science.
Okay.
And there's some really interesting stuff here that kind of challenges what a lot of us think is the best way to learn new things.
Yeah.
So this research we're looking at suggests that maybe solving problems isn't always the best way to actually learn something new.
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, it seems so intuitive, right? Like the more problems you solve, the better you understand the concept.
Yeah, you'd think so, right. But it turns out just focusing on getting to the root answer.
And you get the whole thing. So, rather than reading the paper, here is a 15-minute, incredibly enthusiastic podcast about that paper. Try this. They love this. instead of doing the reading, listen to the podcast and then come into the seminar and appear very knowledgeable about the thing by just saying what the enthusiastic people on the podcast. Anthony has put his hand up, and I should have said right at the start, I do not mind being interrupted. Please ask questions, argue with me. Yeah, it's early days for this, and there was a whole period just before Christmas. People were saying, I've just tried Notebook LM, and the man is coming in as the expert. Google responded with some tweaks to this, and I have got examples now. I had a lovely one where the man starts the thing off and says, and we have a real expert with us today, and introduces the female, the higher pitched voice there, yes? And I think they have been conscious of the criticism and now say they are random. It's not the man as the expert. Let me explain this to you, my dear. It's not really what we would want to encourage, but there's going to be more language versions. You have got this interactive mode where you can sort of ask it to focus on a particular thing. Could you say more about this? So, this will get better and better. Anybody who thinks it has peaked already, I think I'd like to know your reason why. So I think that's pretty cool and makes text very, very accessible in a way which the written text doesn't necessarily. We have screenshots of that in case I couldn't get it to work today. So let's move on to what you are listening to at the moment, which is me just chatting to you. I can, on a good day, toggle my captions on here. So we've got surtitles. It's just like being at Covent Garden. Well, it's not just like being at Covent Garden, to be fair. So is that now distracting from what I am saying? Or does this now make this more accessible? I think the jury is out on this. I really do. Because generally what I know about cognitive load theory and multimedia learning theory is do not present the same information in two formats, which is why it's really bad to just read words from the text from the slide. I would never do that in these talks, would I? Okay, so, what are you paying attention to at this point? I had a student last year from Beijing who didn't start learning English until after she had graduated in computer science. And she would always ask for the captions to be turned on, not because my language is really particularly difficult for her to follow, but because she found it easier to follow the written form of the language. Similarly, if you have got hearing impaired students, this seems entirely the right thing to do. And I think the rest of us get used to ignoring the subtitles, the surtitles. They are getting more and more accurate. I've not actually looked because that distracts me from what I'm saying, but it gets better and better. It really does. And, the more data they have to train it on, the more of our lectures they listen to, the more accurate it will be. But if you compare it to drag and dictate in the old days, does anybody remember the whole having to read a particular paragraph? It is way, way more sophisticated than that ever was. It's not, is this a transcript that I could use in court? It is this enough for a student who has very little hearing to be able to understand the gist of the lecture? And I think it is already there. Kevin may wish to contradict me. I think that we'll do it. Language, speech problem. Is there anybody in the room who would like these left on for the rest of the talk? Okay, that gives me slightly more screen real estate. So caption preferences, I think I should just be able to toggle those off. If you're working in Microsoft PowerPoint, as the university would very much like you to do, there's a translation thing built into this. So if you have one student in the room who has very little English, but is much more comfortable following in their mother tongue, then you can swap it so that the subtitles are shown in their language. That's probably less confusing for the rest of us because we're not even looking at the translator of that, I suspect. Hi there. Yes. Yes. It's harder, okay? But you can do it with recordings very easily. I think I'm going to show that in a little while's time when we come to language. You can also do it with the phone. My experience of using the phone apps to do this is it's okay if the microphone is able to clearly pick up the speaker. But it depends on the venue and how much noise there is. I'm sure in your lectures they're all being. It sometimes happens in some. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. And I think at the moment have a policy of subtitles by default. And there is, because the jury is out about whether this is helpful or not. I think if you cannot hear what is being said, it is helpful. If you cannot understand what is being said because of the language, then a translation into subtitles is going to be helpful. But there is this thing about, is it distracting for the other? And it's not I would like evidence on this. Where is the evidence from? I'm just making this up as I go along. But at least I'm willing to say I'm making it up as I go. Right, okay, so let me go back into my copy of Word here and do a new document, new blank document in your own time. There we go. And then I will turn on, if I can find it, just draw your attention to transcribe. If you're working online in Office, you can give it a recording and then it will produce a Word document based on the recording. What I'm going to do now, though, is just switch on Dictate. As usual, the help on this. Just start listening to me. So my feeling is here that there are many of our students, for one reason or another, who find it really difficult to get started with writing an essay. They've perhaps got all of the ideas. If you bring them in for a tutorial and say, tell me about these ideas, they can do a pretty good job of actually explaining the thing. But somehow there's an element of fear of actually starting to type. And that's the whole thing about overcoming procrastination. Look, just start writing. You can improve it later. Or in this case, just start speaking. Again, you think about particular barriers to learning. But I think for many of our students, being able to just talk their ideas out loud, being able to speak in a clear and coherent and reasonably well-structured way, and occasionally taking pause for breath, is not a bad skill for them to acquire whilst they're working or whilst they're studying. So I'm going to turn that off, hopefully. And I don't know, I think it's done a pretty good job of transcribing what I've been saying. Muna may say, oh, it's not good enough. But you don't want them to just hand in this stream of consciousness thing instead of their essay, reading through what you've just said and improving it. And then we get to the edge of the generative AI tool. I can ping this to Copilot and say, improve this for me. We can do this now. Yeah? So, rewrite this as a clear, coherent, well-spelt paragraph. Yeah? Have I crossed a line? Is that my work or is that the machine's work? Because you're teaching English. Yes. Okay. Right. Una. I want to return to this in the last quarter of an hour or so. Debbie, can you remind me or tell me when we get to noon? Thank you. But this comes back to the Vygotskian thing. If the child with the Vygotskian teacher, if the teacher is always doing it for them and never teaching them how to do it, that's not really the ZPD anymore. That's just, teacher can do this. There has to be an element of, yes, this has been helpful. I see what it's done here. I've learnt from this. Just getting the machine to do all of this feels as though I don't have to go to the gym anymore because I can get the robot to go to the gym for me. It's not going to help. It really isn't. Kevin.
I guess but it's not like new. It's something more. These are really, yes, all we want to do.
How do we check for their understanding? If it is simply stringing words, or as we now call them, tokens, together, the machine is really very, very good at doing that. There must be more to it. It's not 12 o'clock already.
No, it's not 12 o'clock already.
I have an example, so I will talk more about this one. I've got an example. Go on. Yeah, sorry. Right. I think that it has to be their ideas. I'd like it to be their language, not literary. Therefore, tidying it up, making it clearer. What are we giving credit for? Is really hard. Okay, so you have all come to know and love Panopto. Yes, quickly. Yeah. 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 And this is essentially where I stand on this, that you can use it, but tell me that you have used it. Kevin. Yeah.
Isn't there maybe not? We've used see the eyes.
Oh, yes, yes, how lovely. This is what I'm excited about.
And I wasn't sure if you were going to cover that.
Sort of, yeah. No, the point is well made. Thank you very much. So you've all come to know and love Panopto, I'm sure. I click on the first bit of its attempt at my captions here. I scroll down to the end of its attempt at my caption, at what I've been saying here. Actually, I didn't do that correctly. Let's see if we can do it again now. Yes, shift-click to copy that onto the clipboard. Move over to Microsoft Word, which may be running somewhere on this computer. Sorry, Word, Window, lecture transcript. I paste all of that in, and I have a transcript of sorts of my lecture there. Once I have it there, save that, save that, and I can bring it back into something like Copilot and say interesting things to it. Read the attached lecture transcript, give me a 5-bullet point summary of what I said in 2.5 hours about how to plan a sequence of lessons. Importance of detailed planning, components of a lesson plan, adaptability and flexibility. It gives this incredibly succinct summary of the content of my lecture. Believe it or not, I do have students who struggle to maintain attention during one of my talks over 2.5 hours. I know, it's astonishing, isn't it? But, you could imagine a rare circumstance in which that happened. I can give them a summary of the key points, so they can. This is about empowerment, not about me doing this for them. They can learn how to get that transcript for themselves and how to actually get the key bits of Miles's talk without even having to bother listening. Robert. But
Picking up on that.
yeah, that's on account of you being a good teacher. So the microphones which they have equipped the desks with in these rooms are, I believe, called boundary effect microphone. A little bit of technical vocabulary, just drop it into a conversation. We should pick up your response to me as well as my teaching from the front here. So if you're using the systems the university provide, the microphone should be good enough to capture the audio. The voice recognition, not speech recognition, they're apparently different things, is not brilliant in the free tools at the moment. It won't easily say, this was student 17, that was student 15. So you'll get the words, but you won't get the individual identity. Way easier in Teams, because everybody's logged in with a name on there, yeah? It knows their names when they're speaking. So there are tools for online meetings where you can actually say, this person said that. Have any of you ever been to a meeting where an otter has been invited to join? What are the otters doing in there? I've been to one where the person is so important they couldn't be bothered to come to the meeting, but they sent their otter along to listen in and give them a summary of what was said. I'm going to do this for my lectures. Talk amongst yourselves, and I'll get the otter to just transcribe the thing. So, yeah. There is and an incredible amount of money, because paying a transcriber is expensive. Otters apparently will work for just fish or something. I don't know how this even works. Yes.
There is a thing.
Yeah.
It will also.
Yeah. Which one could then delete afterwards.
But again.
Okay, I'm conscious that Debbie is going to tell me we're at noon very soon. Right. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to show you the next question I asked, because, I'm giving a lecture about how to prepare for an assignment, talking about planning a sequence of lessons. most of you could write most of that yourselves. But then I asked Copilot, tell me 5 interesting things that Miles said during this 2.5 hours. And it picked up some really interesting points from this, because it knows what's likely to come next. This is how a language model works, where I don't follow the language model's approach to what will come next in the talk. It says, oh my gosh, that's a high temperature thing. That's an interesting bit of the lecture, and pays more attention. So this thing about if you hand it in twice, we have to mark the first one. We've got this whole thing about does assessment promote progress? And I did the thing about weighing the pig does not make the pig heavier, and so it's picked out on that. And it's done an excellent job, not just of summarizing the key points of the lecture, but actually finding the interesting things that I said during the talk. Believe it or not, it said that there were some interesting things in the talk. And of course, then, because I've got the transcript, I can do other things that I can do with transcripts here. So, assessing progress in education. Here we have our enthusiastic podcasters talking in 23 minutes about my 2.5.
Or is it even about, having your attitude shift a bit about the subject?
Yeah, and what I thought was really interesting is that the lecture sort of boils it all down to quite a simple idea, really.
Okay.
It says that essentially progress is, being able to do something or know something that you couldn't before.
Right.
So in computing, that...
It's that time of the term when I've got I've got 2 students who weren't in on Wednesday because they're not well at the moment. I send them the Panopto recordings, but the analytics rather suggest that not many people watch my Panopto. I know it's astonishing, Anthony, but there you go. There's a chance that they might be able to find 23 minutes whilst traveling to listen to these 2 incredibly enthusiastic people talking about what they missed in my lecture. Removing barriers, promoting accessibility. Okay, we are pretty much at 12 o'clock. Let me tell you a little about the other thing. Oh, we must play this. Okay, so anybody tried Suno yet? Explain Suno to the room, please, sir. Yeah, so it limits you to, I think, 200 words in the prompt. So I can't give it the whole swell of paper and say, make me a song about this. But I can ask it to write a song about Sweller's cognitive load theory. Here we go.
Too much noise, the signal's lost. Simplify the tangled webs. Clear the chatter, feel the rest.
You can listen to the rest on your own if you would like to. Yeah, I don't think it's going to fill Wembley Stadium. I hope it doesn't even appear on Spotify, but you never know with these sort of things. It's going to talk a little about languages and the translation tools, which are phenomenally good now. And again, built into the tools we use. I showed you my, no, that's an assignment draft. Let's go back to my transcript. No? Oh, come on, work. Here we go. And I go to Tools. I go to Translate Document. And I invite the room to tell me if anybody has a language in which they're fluent other than English. Yes. Persian. Okay, so I'm hoping Persian is on the list. I've got Persian. I see. Right, so. And again, imagine the context of we have a student there who has very fluent Persian, but relatively limited academic English. Bless them, they've come along to my lecture. I've done my level best to put the Persian transcripts, subtitles up there. But there are bits in that which they really didn't. Being able to produce a Persian translation of the talk, does that look like reasonably clear and coherent Persian? Well, you have to bear in mind this is a transcript of my lecture, which didn't even make sense in English. So, so we're working with very low quality text as our start point. And again, in the context of a student who is fluent in Persian but has limited academic English, helpful or not helpful? Not helpful in learning English, perhaps, but helpful in learning how to assess computing, or whatever it was I happened to be talking about back then. Okay, so there was other stuff. We were going to talk about using the language models, going to give you some examples. Oh, this one, because this came up earlier. This is like Debbie's example of the proofreader. Oops, slide. Right, with the student's permission but not declaring their name. I had a trainee student come to me on Wednesday. They've got a week's extension assignment. It says it's 4,200 words long. We say your assignment is 500 words long. That is the most important thing because there is a measurable metric you've written. Let me start. Miles, how can I make it short? So I start by saying, search through for all of the words that have why. Them generally going to make it better. We've got this paragraph that we look at. You may have had meetings like this, yeah? I know lots of ways in which this could be improved. Okay, you're looking at that and thinking, this person's got a degree already, this person, yeah. How could they, there are advice that we could give. I showed him how to send it to, I think I used ChatGPT, Copilot would do this as well. And with the single prompt, okay, please reduce the length of this by 10%, keep the meaning and language the same. And it responds with, using techniques such as it's way better, yes? It has done what it was asked to do. It has kept the ideas there. It has maintained much of the original language. It has done what the trainee wanted, which was make it shorter so as to meet the magic 3,500 number. I think this is still their work. They come to me and say, could you help me make this shorter? If I have the time, I will do that for them. Is this academic mistake? Yes? Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you say to it, something like, read my essay here, look through for any sections where I appear to be repeating myself, and it will come back with, you've repeated yourself here and here and here. If you then say, rewrite this with the repetition removed, that's the point where I'm no longer clear whose work it is. Getting advice is fine. If my trainee came to me and said, I need to write another paragraph about this idea, could you do it for me? They know what the response is going to be from me, yeah? ChatGPT and Copilot will gladly do that. And you can understand the temptation. Deadline is approaching, time is ticking, I need another 300 words to make it up to 3150. I know. I think that is definitely cheating. This I don't think it is, but there may be a few. Yes. Yeah, and that's exactly what I said to them. And I said, put me a little star where you have done this to a section. And there is likely to be some adjustment to the fourth marking criteria about communication, but even that feels mean now. They're being honest about it. Yeah? Okay, I will do one amusing story and then we will chat about broader issues with all of this. So I have a dyslexic 14-year-old daughter. She is set as her classics homework, write an obituary of Hannibal Barca. This is Hannibal with the elephants crossing the Alps, all of that sort of thing. This is a nice classics homework. It's a really interesting task. She's going to do something creative, but it's drawing on the knowledge which she has acquired. She has geeky parents. She says to ChatGPT, could you write me an obituary of Hannibal Barca, please? And it will, of course, gladly do this. She knows if she hands in that work, a classics teacher is going to say, that's not your work. So she says, write it as if it's dyslexic, okay? And it produces this very weird response. which kind of just introduces random spelling mistakes in there, because that's clearly what dyslexia does, but also then sort of pays attention to the wrong thing and starts writing this obituary as if Hannibal himself were dyslexic, which was not quite what she meant. So Hannibal's legacy will live on, reminding us that even in life's typos, there's beauty and humour. It's just so sweet. And of course, we don't know if he was dyslexic. It was really difficult to get an EP assessment back in those days. Still is, to be fair. Okay. Right. Generally, I think we think that the first three of these are fine, because we will do that. They will do that. The bottom one is definitely not okay. This is the grey area at the moment. If I've got the tools running, if I've got the new version of Bing running alongside Copilot, running alongside Microsoft Word, and it's doing text completion for me, and I just have to press Tab, and it fills in the rest of the sentence. Kevin will know this from VS Code, where you've got the GitHub Copilot thing. Yeah, I can write all of that code for you. It does that. At that point, whose work is this? I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how we should feel about this. Interestingly, when they apply for our undergraduate programs, UCAS is very clear that personal statements should be, personal statements, that they should be the student's work. They are allowed to use it to use GPT or whatever to brainstorm ideas, to help with the structure of the statement, to get it to read back the statement and look at how it could be improved. But the copying and pasting from ChatGPT is discouraged when it comes to applying for a place at the university. I think that's kind of where I feel the line is. And I'm glad that UCAS say that's where we draw the line. Oh, time. Let me just play it to you. It's fun.
Of course, okay. However, I realise I'm showing my age by showing a handwritten essay here, whereas, of course, you young people get your parents to type them for you. No, anyway, but the value wasn't in the essay. The actual end product is worthless. Okay? What's valuable is the effort you had to put in to produce the essay. Now, what AI essays do is they shortcut from the request to the delivery of the finished good and bypass the very part of the journey which is actually valuable, which is the time and effort you invest in constructing the essay in the first place. The essay is worthless, okay? You'll never go and reread it, and if you do, you're embarrassed. What was valuable about that essay was the effort required.
And that's the thing that I think we should do our level best to persuade our students of. Removing the barriers so that they can access and be included in the curriculum, in the programs that we offer, absolutely the right thing. Taking all of the challenge, all of the bite out of this by just, getting the machine to do it for you is definitely not the way to learn anything. Oh, shush, it was good the first time. Broader issues. So on the slide behind me, Kevin, I have show me an image of a computer scientist, and I have show me an image of a programmer. The 8 people illustrated on my slide all have things in common. What do you immediately notice? Yes, it's the spectacles which is the dead giveaway, isn't it? It's staring at the screen. But, they are all white, they are all male. And that, it is just looking at the pictures we have labeled in this way and assuming that is how the world is. We would like the world to be rather different from this. If anybody asks you, Kevin, what's the difference between a computer scientist and a programmer? Beards. Okay, right. Okay. Does it not? Right. Okay. And then the stuff which is really hard to pin down. So I went to Anthony's lovely talk yesterday about sustainability. And all of the times I've been using Copilot in this talk live with you, those lovely enthusiastic podcasts, have in the back of your mind an image of some huge warehouse with loads and loads of computers making a huge amount of noise with things spinning. Okay, there are still things spinning, yeah? And the carbon, the embedded carbon, the cooling, and the electricity, all of that just to produce 8 images of computer science. Cost to them. The people who make want to minimize it. It's really hard to get running this query. And we need to start getting students. Is this
necessarily AI forever. If you do a web do
Wow. Yeah. And there is a difference between training the model in the first place and using the model once it's trained. But there are non-trivial economic and environmental costs to this. There are other costs as well. I'm skipping through this bit. Look, until 2 years ago, November, just over 2 years ago, our use of language was with people. We talked to one another, we read things they'd written, we listened to talks that they had given in recordings or whatever. It was a person-to-person communication. Along comes ChatGPT and its fellows and changes that. It figures out how to use our thing, language, probably better than many of us do ourselves. And I feel that a child's understanding of the world, yes, through experiment, yes, but much of it through language. Who is that language with now? He says, talk is the currency of learning, how we develop and shape our ideas, deepen our thinking, explore subject matter, and share our thoughts and feelings. I think he is right on this. Who is that talk with now? And does that matter? Anthony Seldon, learning is at its best. Human beings are at their best when they are challenged and overcome those challenges. And it's fair to acknowledge that for many of our learners, there are huge challenges getting in the way of what we would like them to do, how they're going to learn best. But you know from your own life so far, the things that stick with you today is the stuff that you struggle to understand, struggle to learn the first. Along comes the AI and says, job done, here's your essay. Takes all of that chance for learning out of this. Here you go, the ubiquitous Willingham quote, memory is the residue of thought. The more you think about something, the more likely it is you'll remember it later. Unless you're concentrating and focused and critiquing the article and thinking about what they said, then are you really likely to remember it? Listening to the podcast of Sweller may not actually be as good as reading the Sweller page. Definitely more accessible, I think I could say without fear of much contradiction. Talking of contradiction, I have no time left for questions. Isn't that a result? Okay, so there you go. Listen, folks, thank you so much for coming along to this. Thank you.